We've had a lot of discussion about many of the things that we need to look to do. And it's critical that we also pay some attention to how we're going to pay for it, because we need to involve all the sectors of American society, and we need to look at ways to leverage government funding. And, you know, honestly, I thought it was very important and, frankly, worked pretty hard to get Jonathan Greenblatt to come out from the White House. Jonathan is a Special Assistant to the President and Director of the Office of Social Innovation and Civic Participation within the White House Domestic Policy Council. He's focused on impact investment and social enterprise, and Jonathan brings both the background in terms of analysis and policy development. He founded the Impact Economy Initiative at the Aspen Institute, which is focused on the nexus between impact investing and public policy. He's also a former faculty member here in Los Angeles at the Anderson School of Management at UCLA. He's also got enormous experience in terms of direct investing. He's been described as a serial social entrepreneur. He is the co-founder, many of you I think have seen at Starbucks, Ethos Water. Jonathan co-founded Ethos Brands, which markets Ethos Water, and was then subsequently acquired by Starbucks. And part of the concept is that Ethos Water uses its profits to help children get clean water around the world. He also, he deserves a hand for that. Go ahead. He also founded All for Good, which enables more Americans to serve in volunteer opportunities. It collects, though, it's the largest aggregation of volunteer opportunities on the web. So he's got this enormous experience in real-world, successful social impact investing, and he's now applying that to national policy development and implementation. We really appreciate him flying out from D.C. for today's conference. Jonathan Greenblatt.
So good afternoon. It's great to be here, and especially as someone who spent the last dozen years or so in LA, it's nice to come home. The weather's a little more preferable here in Los Angeles today than it is DC, let me assure you. I want to thank Conway certainly for that very gracious introduction, and I want to note what an impressive, I was mentioning to Conway and others earlier, what an impressive day this has been. So I think we should all give a round of applause to Conway and Dr. Ross for what's been a great, really, it's quite impressive. I should also note that I'm humbled to be on a lineup that includes people like Marian Wright Edelman and Peter Edelman and others who will forget far than I will ever know about addressing these issues of better outcomes for children. But I'll do the best that I can and share with you some of the ways that we're thinking about how we can make a positive impact on children and families in Los Angeles and California and around the country. So as Conway mentioned, I head up the Office of Social Innovation and Civic Participation for the President. How many of you knew there was such an office before you saw my name on the lineup? Okay, well, that's not too bad. What I'll tell you, it's an office that the President created in early 2009, shortly after after the first inauguration. And he wanted to bring the insights of social entrepreneurship and impact investing directly into the Oval Office of the White House to change the way that we make policy. He's deeply committed to a social innovation agenda, and you know, I don't want to spend too much time on theory. I want to talk about what's actually happening. But if I had to sum up, someone said thank you, there you go. But if I had to sum up social innovation, it's basically about accelerating achievement of our agenda, propelling progress in our priorities, getting things done more quickly, more cost efficiently, and ultimately more effectively. And today our agenda is as simple and straightforward as it's actually complex and challenging. How do we end the cycle of poverty for children and families? How do we break the school-to-prison pipeline and instead strengthen the cradle-to-career pathways so we can enable more opportunities for those who need it most? You know, Mayor Garcetti quoted from that amazing New York Times series about that young girl, Dasani, which I think put a real human face on this issue of poverty. And it's important to do that because the statistics on their own are just staggering. So how are we trying to get this done? How are we trying to help the Dasanis of the world? We have a simple approach we describe as elevating community solutions. This notion predicates on a very simple idea that the president and my boss, domestic policy advisor Cecilia Munoz, deeply believe. We simply can't drive lasting change and by creating new top-down programs in Washington, D.C. Instead, we need to cultivate bottom-up practices in cities like Los Angeles, in small towns like Vacaville in Central California, where ordinary people are already coming together to tackle tough problems. You know, we see this across the country in places like Cleveland, where a coordinated approach has driven incredible success in the educational arena, improving high school graduation rates, improving literacy rates. We see it in Milwaukee, where a similar approach has lowered teen pregnancy rates. We're learning from successful grassroots models like these. Sometimes they're referred to as collective impact. Is that a term that folks around the room are a little bit familiar with? There's at least one person, maybe two, maybe four, five. So we don't quite have a quorum, but I'll tell you that we think there are several powerful organizing principles to this theory of collective impact that I want to share, because they characterize a lot of the place-based work that you just started to hear about in the last panel, whether it's promise neighborhoods or promise zones or choice neighborhoods or these burn grants. A lot of this work predicates on a really simple set of tenets. First, concentrating on cross-sector approaches that involve all actors in a community, not just advocates or social service agencies, but businesses, schools, foundations, faith-based institutions, nonprofits, and government, because everyone is a stakeholder in our shared success as a society. So number two, a deep focus on data and evidence. And it was interesting to hear this again in just the last panel. In our interconnected world where we can analyze every email and count every click, we can do more to try to understand existing data that we're already collecting, to identify trends and try to get at what are the root causes underlying problems. This is crucial because we've got to ensure in this environment that we preserve and conserve every taxpayer dollar to drive outcomes and maximize impact. So we will aggressively experiment and support innovative practices where evidence can show us and help us to understand how we can invest in what works, because we can't afford to do otherwise. Thirdly, cooperation. Now, this is something that doesn't necessarily happen all that frequently in Washington these days, but it happens every single day at the local level. And these are lessons that President Obama learned when he was a community organizer on the south side of Chicago, where people came together from all walks of life, from all different faiths, to get things done. And we recognize that this has tremendous value, especially when it's part of a coordinated cross-sector effort and when it's informed by data and evidence, so people can meet on a regular basis, review results, and iterate on tactics to invest in what works. So seeing the success of collective impact has led us to focus how we can empower localities like Los Angeles. To do so, we're currently concentrating on the issue of financial innovation and impact investing to find ways to unlock capital and increase the flow of resources to organizations that need it most, and then to optimize those resources. So again, we invest in what works. This is crucial in our current circumstances. I mean, the data shows us that the economy is continuing to grow, jobs are continuing to expand, but it isn't happening nearly fast enough. And as Bob Putnam would say, we have a problem in terms of the distribution of opportunities. They're not spread equitably across society. We know this. I know many of you know this because you work on these issues every day. And we see this particularly amongst what we call opportunity youth. Young men, typically, between 16 to 24, who are out of school and out of work. To think that's nearly 7 million Americans. And many of them are spread across a small number of census tracts where poverty is really concentrated. We were discussing this just a few minutes ago, that few people realize it's almost just a little bit over 3% of the census tracts in this country where nearly 50% of the poverty is concentrated. So we have a societal problem concentrated in specific areas where we know we can do more. So growth is taking place, but as I said, not fast enough. And the groups that are often hit hardest by this dichotomy are often the human services nonprofits who are being asked to do more with less. How many of you in this room are from human services nonprofits? Will you raise your hands? So many of you. So many of you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. The data simply shows us that demand is increasing year on year, and yet the flow of resources is decreasing. Part of that is sequestration and contracting public dollars. Part of that is lessening of philanthropic dollars. So we know we need to do more. Because despite what the pundits might say, the safety net that matters so much to a healthy society, it isn't some easy hammock where people want to recline. It needs to be a trampoline so that people can bounce back. So we need to ensure that our nonprofits have the capital that they need to thrive. So we've pioneered several models. Number one, the use of innovation funds as one approach to accomplish this task. I'll call attention to something called the Social Innovation Fund, which essentially is like a fund of funds developed by the government at $50 million a year, which then deploys that capital through intermediaries operating close to the ground in local communities, who then raise additional matching or amplifying funds to increase the impact. So just a few minutes ago, before walking on this stage, I met a CIF intermediary here. That was Rory? Nina Revor from the Children's Institute. Or some of you may know Chrysalis, right, just down the road, that helps people from Skid Row transition into jobs. Adlai Wortman, the longtime CEO of Chrysalis, told me once that his job was to help people get fired. Or help people quit, excuse me. Boy, did I say that wrong. That's what happens when you ad-lib. But to help people quit, so he could hire them into the social enterprises run by Chrysalis, and then they could leave him for more stable, longer-term employment. CIF and the Children's Institute are just two of the hundreds of high-impact nonprofits funded by over $150 million distributed through the CIF, with an additional $400 million in private capital. Another example is the capital stack approach, which has been pioneered by the Freshworks Fund, which I know you're going to hear about in the next panel, moderated by Tina Castro of the California Endowment. So let me turn the remainder of my talk to another topic that's incredibly important in terms of financial innovation. I want to talk about social impact bonds, or as we refer to them, pay for success. It's a simple idea that's actually not very novel in the business world. You pay a vendor based on performance. But in government, this is an incredibly new approach. Instead of distributing taxpayer dollars on the basis of census tract or congressional district, it's about investing in what works and rewarding results. In case people aren't familiar with the approach, let me quickly describe it. In a pay-for-success model, at a time when public coffers have thinned and philanthropy is down, private investors will pay for social interventions with strong evidence. When these programs deliver their predetermined target results over a defined period of time, government will pay back the investor their principal. When the intervention exceeds the target, when it delivers better than expected returns, government will pay back the investor their principal plus interest. Government can do so because it uses the savings from the successful intervention to fund the investor. And when the intervention is not successful, when it delivers less than expected returns, when it fails outright, government pays the investor nothing. Government only pays for success. So this is a new approach, which is important on several levels. Number one, it helps provide the cash flow to nonprofits who need it to deliver essential services. Number two, for private investors looking for ways to deploy capital, it creates a new opportunity to fund important social programs. And number three, for government, it's a way to preserve scarce taxpayer resources. So again, government only pays for success. So we're quite excited about this model, and it's taking off across the country. We've seen pay for success strategies in New York around juvenile justice and reducing recidivism. We've seen it in the state of Utah about improving early childhood education. We've seen it in New Jersey around improving the delivery of healthcare services. And we know right here in California, the California Endowment is exploring an experiment with pay for success around alleviating childhood asthma. In the fiscal year 14 budget, which now, by the way, I think Congresswoman Bass was speaking about this earlier, it's back in the news because we now have a budget deal in Washington. thank God. The president proposed nearly $500 million to pay for success initiatives. $500 million. Let me break that down for you and point out to some very specific opportunities that matter for all of you and ways that you can take part. First, the president proposed to create a new $300 million Pay for Success incentive fund at our Treasury Department. This is designed to help the cities like Los Angeles, the counties like LA County, states like California, and foundations like the California Endowment to experiment with Pay for Success. We want to help with credit enhancements that might encourage a first-time grant maker to experiment in this area, or help an elected official understand how it can work. We want to explore training and technical assistance. We want to support the spread of Pay for Success, make it easy for people to use. Now, at present, we're working on program design. What should be the structure of the fund? What should be the rules? And as I said to you before, what we know is that we can't do it alone in Washington. We need help. So we did something kind of unusual here. After we proposed the program, we did a public request for information, or an RFI, to get ideas on program design, to get ideas on what we should fund. So that's where you come in. We want your help. We want your ideas, your suggestions, your thoughts. So let me tell you how to do this, because right now my colleagues at Treasury are reviewing public inputs. All of you have a chance. I'm looking out at each table and each person sitting in a chair to impact on this right now, to give comments on this RFI. How do you find it? It's quite simple. Go to whitehouse.gov. Search Treasury and RFI. You'll find my blog post from 2 weeks ago with a link right there, so you can click through to the posting for the RFI and input your comments. It's really quite simple. Those of you with laptops or iPads like you, young lady, can do it right now. And we really want you to, because again, we know that answers won't come from Washington. They'll only come with deep local engagement. So in addition to the incentive fund, we put out an additional $200 million to support Pay for Success programming across different areas like workforce development, juvenile justice, educational outcomes. We're serious about putting our money where our mouth is. Just last month, the Labor Department awarded $12 million to New York and another nearly $12 million to Massachusetts for more workforce development, Pay for Success grants. So I know Mayor Garcetti talked about what you're waiting for this news this week. There is more money out there to invest in what works, and Pay for Success is just one example. Just before Thanksgiving, my colleagues at the Department of Housing and Urban Development announced they would provide an additional $5 billion in grant funding to assist in the rebuilding and strengthening effort following Hurricane Sandy. And they explicitly encouraged states to call out for the use of evidence-based Pay for Success strategies. So we had $500 million in the budget last year. HUD just made up to $5 billion available, and there's more coming. But again, all of this is not about us coming in from Washington to make these investments. It's about unlocking local capital from new investors to provide capital that's so needed at our nonprofits delivering such essential services. So ultimately, it's about Pay for Success is one example of how we can apply new models, explore new styles of investment, so we can capture and deliver results on a wider set of issues, particularly this issue of combating child poverty and creating pathways for our young people. And like I said, we need your help, we need your ideas. So for those of you who want to give comments to the RFI, I would encourage you. For those of you who have different ideas, other thoughts, other suggestions beyond Pay for Success, I mean it when I say we want to hear from you. So now I'm going to do something that most of my colleagues in the White House won't do. Either I'm a little more brave or a little more foolish. I'm going to give you my email address. I read every email, so to answer the question at that table over there, I don't always respond as quickly as I might like, but I promise you I'll respond. It's really simple. It's innovation@who.eop.gov. I'll say it again. The word innovation @who.eop.gov. So, why does this matter? Because again, as I said at the start of my presentation, We recognize that it's only through the continued engagement with all of you that we can literally make progress in our priorities and accelerate achievement of our agenda. It's not going to happen in Washington. It's going to happen through collaboration with you and with other communities across the country. So on behalf of the President, Cecilia, and everyone at the White House, we look forward to continuing on this journey with all of you, not just because it matters for our children, but because it matters for the good of the country. Thank you.